a lot of real in-depth music lovers that I think maybe because they're not in the East Bay, they're not in London, they aren't in like a center of a well-known music center, that they pay a lot more attention.
Jesse, hey, how's it going?
Doing great. How are you?
Good. Yeah. Welcome to the Question the Answers podcast. It's really great to have you on here. This is Jesse Townley, also known as Jesse Luscious in the greater punk rock community. Jesse is actually over in the UK. You're in Nottingham, correct?
Yes, I am in Nottingham, as they say. You don't say Nottingham, right. Even though I sometimes still slip. But I just say Nottingham just to... They already know I'm a foreigner, so I don't have to drive it home.
Right. But yeah, so Jesse Townley, Jesse Luscious, has been a part of the greater punk rock community basically since you were a teenager, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and you grew up in Philadelphia and spent a lot of time in your young adulthood in the Berkeley area, like Northern California Bay Area. And you've been a member of... Go ahead, sorry.
30 years.
Yeah, 30 years.
Yeah.
And you've been a member of such bands as The Criminals. Am I pronouncing this right? Grups?
The Grups, sure.
The Grups, as well as Blatz and the Frisk. And your most recent projects are the Pathogens. And then, I was trying to recall, you have another project too that you're doing, right?
A new band called Scene Killers, based here in Nottingham. It has people from two long-running Nottingham bands called TV Crime and the Hip Priests. Both have toured a lot around UK and Europe. And the Hip Priests, actually, the Pathogens played with them at the Hemlock in San Francisco, 2018, somewhere in there. Anyway, that's where I know them from. And when I said I was moving to Nottingham, Austin from the Hip Priests, one of the guitarists, was like, "Do you want to jam?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And we put out a record, just came out. That's on of all the things, No Front Teeth Records. Sorry, wow. And it's called Rev It Up, and you can find it on Bandcamp at scenekillers.bandcamp, whatever,
Great. Yeah, I'll make sure to add the links for all the projects that you've been related to.
And by the way, Marco from No Front Teeth is a great guy and has been very very understanding with various band caused delays and things. So I'm sure this is just another notch in our little book of screw ups.
Right. But yeah, so so needless to say, like, you are somebody who is super knowledgeable and experienced within the greater punk rock scene, not just even the punk rock scene, but like the music scene in general. Because beyond being a musician and front person for several bands, you've also worked for several labels over the course of your time. You also currently work at Packaged Sounds there in the UK, which is a vinyl and other media manufacturing organization who I've worked with quite a lot with Sell the Heart Records, who do excellent work, by the way. So if anyone's interested in getting vinyl pressed, I would definitely hit up Jesse. But you've also been a volunteer. You were a volunteer at the 924 Gilman Street Project for, at least a few decades, right?
Couple decades.
Yeah. And you also, I know, you wrote for Maximum Rock and Roll, correct? And a few other zines over the years?
I was part of the book review section. One of the original book reviewers. I was there for probably a decade. Wow. As a shit worker.
Yeah, shit worker. I love it.
Yeah. Well, that's the name for the volunteers, right? So.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Yeah. But so, yeah, I mean, gosh, like I'm fascinated to have a chance to like kind of dig into your life and experiences and kind of talk about what it is that you've seen over the years. But right off the bat, though, I'd like to start just like talking about some of these newer projects. So you already kind of dove in a little bit with the Scene Killers, and so the Pathogens is the other project that you're currently involved with, and so that's you and I think Cinder from Tilt, correct?
Yes.
And then who else is involved in that project?
So it's been Cinder from Tilt and me on co-vocals, and then Mark Lee on drums. He's been in every band in Oakland, practically. Like everybody, he came out with Iconochrist from Arkansas back in the late 80s, and has just been in a ton of bands, mostly kind of like the heavier Oakland bands, and he actually, the first time we played together was when the Criminals reunited in 2012 for a couple of years there. And I mean, Mark Lee and I have always been great friends, and we were just kind of astounded that it had taken that long for us to be in a band together. And so it was when he asked me to, he was one of the people from the band who asked me to join the Pathogens. I was like, hell yeah, like I've always wanted to be in a band with you because you're great. And great drummer, great person. And Sebastian, who has been in a bunch of Oakland bands like the Divvies and a ton of others. I can't even think, like I didn't actually come prepared with any kind of information, any kind of cheat sheet. But, and then Noah, who's been in a ton of bands as well. Mystery bassist Tovino. Right now, though, we're kind of in a state of flux. Obviously, I'm 5,000 miles away, and we've released one song. It's a cover of the Adolescence, of an Adolescent song that we just put out on Bandcamp. It's for a compilation for Steve Soto's family funeral expenses or something. And then we're recording actually right now. I have a bunch of songs I have to do vocal for through this microphone right here, and then gonna send it through the tubes and wires of the internet back to Oakland, where they're gonna mix it into everything. So there's some band churn going on right now. So that was actually, before we started this podcast, I was actually talking with Mark Lee about it over electronically about some of the bits and pieces that we're trying to put together.
Right.
So anyway, so we put out a full-length record and ourselves on my old label, Zaphio Records. And we put out a 7-inch on 1986 Records, which was run by Kamala and some other people from Gilman. And we're also on a for them. But yeah, you can find all that stuff on Bandcamp or other places where you find music online. So it's all digitally available as well as physically.
Nice. So. Yeah, I haven't had a chance yet to see the Pathogens. I know that just before I started playing in Tsunami Bombs, they played a show with you guys. I think it was at the DNA Lounge.
Or wait, Bottom of the Hill, maybe?
Maybe.
I'm not sure.
I wasn't even able to be at that show.
San Francisco, definitely San Francisco.
Yeah, I know it's in San Francisco. But I mean, Dom definitely speaks super highly of your guys' live show. And I mean, shoot, as somebody who was definitely a fan of the Criminals and Tilt, like back in the day, I still am. I would be excited to see you guys live when I get a chance. Speaking of the Criminals, so one of my earliest punk rock show memories was actually seeing the Criminals in Sonora, California, at the Borderline Warehouse. It was Screw 32, which it was their last show.
The last show, that's right.
The last show, and it was Fury 66, Citizen Fish, and you guys. And I had no idea who the Criminals were. I knew who the Screw 32 was. I had heard of Citizen Fish. I had heard of Fury 66, but I had never heard of the Criminals, and I had no idea what I was in for. And Jesus Christ, I'm not trying to float your boat too much here. It's like, but Jesus Christ, dude, you command the audience and you put on a hell of a show. And I don't think anyone left that show feeling like, dude, the Criminals are a bad band. Like everyone kind of knew, like, dude, the Criminals are fucking, they rock, they rule.
Oh, thank you.
That was easily one of probably one of the most insane punk rock shows that I can think of, really. I mean, because that whole night was just nuts because, I mean, that lineup is super stacked.
That's a great lineup.
I know that it ended, unfortunately, with the dissolving of Screw 32, which was a big deal, because Screw 32 for me at that time was probably my favorite punk rock band at the moment. So it was kind of a bummer, like knowing that it ended up being their last show. And I know that they did a couple of reunion shows not that long ago, but yeah, I mean, and Citizen Fish, I mean, come on, like they're legends. And then Fury 66 are, obviously a great band from out of the Santa Cruz area, if nobody knows who they are. Like Joe Clements.
Of course, Joe is awesome.
Yeah. But no, that was I wanted to share that memory with you, because I don't think I had a chance to tell you about that before, and that was just like I still have the flyer, actually. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a great show, and I mean, honestly, like all of those bands we played with before, and except for Screw 32, we played with them afterwards to a bunch, over the years. It's a great bill, and like, I mean, I love seeing every version of Dick Lucas with the microphone, whether it's Subhumans, Culture Shock, Citizen Fish. When we started doing at Alternative Tentacles, I was at AT, running AT for a decade. We signed Culture Shock for their recent record called, I think it's called Thirst. Wait, no, that's a Citizen Fish one.
Right.
Goods. That's what it's called. And I don't know if I was more excited or if Jello was more excited. And that was really pretty intense for me. I'm like, Jello, all right. He's marking out to Dick Lucas. That's really interesting, and kind of like a measure of the kind of respect and the talent that Dick Lucas has. I mean, like he's one of my favorite writers in terms of lyrics. Like he has over the decades done a lot of songs about very similar things, about the same subjects a lot of times, but he finds different ways to approach them. And it's never boring, whatever he does. And also, I mean, people like around him, like, Phil and Trotsky and Jasper and everybody, like they are such great musicians that they are just a well-oiled machine, even if they seem like like when you meet them in person or you're hanging out with them before or after a show or whatever, they can be like all over the place, but they're still a machine. And they get up there and they play those songs and they're just so good.
Absolutely. And, I remember when I was at that show, having known that they were this, even at that point, kind of a legendary band in many ways. There was a lot of build up to, it's like, oh man, Citizen Fish. And, here I am like this, I mean, I was a teenager and had very little experience in like the greater independent punk rock scene. Like I remember my initial reaction was like, oh man, like, is this going to be good? Like, cause I had no context, cause I honestly had never even listened to them at that point, and they were great. I mean, again, like that was easily one of my favorite shows, like during that time period in my life, and like, I still remember like pretty vividly, like how that show went down, and like, it was a lot of fun, but so you do live in Nottingham.
Yes.
See, I'm saying it correctly now.
Well done.
Yeah, thank you. And so I wanted to kind of ask you, so you've been there now for what, like 2 years?
Year and a half, yeah.
Oh, a year and a half. Okay. And I mean, did you just move there like kind of on a whim, or did you move there because you
well, first off, you can't immigrate to England on a whim.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, it's you have to plan it out, and you have to have resources and have a plan. You can't like the US, they've been tightening up their immigration processes for many years because of the rise of the right wing and the fear of the other, et cetera, et cetera. But no, my better half, we've been talking about leaving the US for years, and she ended up getting in through a student visa, and I came as the spouse of a student. And so she got her second master's, and now she's a lecturer at one of the local universities here. So we're here. We have a 5-year visa. So who knows what happens after that?
Okay.
But yeah, and I mean, once I got here, I was able to get a job at Package Sounds, because I had worked with them when I worked for Fat Records as the production manager over there. They were one of the people who I did records through.
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, because I would imagine that, especially like right now, like it would be tough, but it looks like you were able to maneuver all that stuff just prior to the whole pandemic thing. So it probably, I mean, I'm
Lucked
sure it
out.
was still a daunting task, but I'd imagine that right now it'd probably be impossible at this point, like under
Oh, to move?
virtually
Oh,
any
you can't.
circumstance.
No, nobody can. There's no real movement
Right.
of people. You know.
But you know, so in the short amount of time that you, I guess, were able to kind of experience the like live aspect. I mean, because I know that you've toured over there over the years, you know, with the various groups that you've been in. But now that you live there, I kind of wanted to ask you, like, I mean, are there anything that you would say of note that are markedly different, you know, in terms of like the scene and like the way that the music scene is kind of like, I guess, handled or, you know, done over there versus like the way it's done over here in the States? Like,
Well, physically, it's much different because Nottingham is 120 miles north of Package Sounds, which is right outside of London, and that is seen as an incredible distance to people here. And obviously, being from the States, and especially living in California, 120 miles, it's like that's okay, a couple hours, but big deal, you know. I mean, it's 5 hours to LA if you drive fast enough, you know.
right.
Big deal. You know, like people do that all the time. So that means that you can go shorter distances and play more shows. You also get taken care of better compared to the US in general. However, Scene Killers, I've only played one show with them. We've only played one show because we had a show in January and then lockdown canceled all the rest of our shows.
Right.
So that stunk. But so I haven't seen a lot from about the current scene. We did come through with the Pathogens for 2019 for Bobfest, which was happening in Bath, England. Bobfest is every 2 years. Bremen, Oakland, Bath, and every 2 years it's in one of those three cities. And last year, this year, 2021, it was supposed to be in Bremen, but I think they've bumped it to 2022 because reality just sucks, you know.
Right.
So we actually did a tour from Berlin to Bath, and we played Blackpool and we played Brighton. Yeah, thank you. It was a BR. Like basically, like I made the joke, like we would only play shows in Britain that started with B. Because people are like, why aren't you playing London? And I'm like, it doesn't start with B. Sorry. No, but actually that's just kind of how it shook out. It has to happen. But I mean, people are definitely, maybe it's because they're not being buffeted by the latest thing all the time, but people here know their music. Like I'm always astounded by my bandmates in Scene Killers. Like we'll be talking and I'll be like, oh yeah, that band Black Fork. And they're like, oh yeah, the Black, you know, when they were Black Fork and then they did this and then they became this band for a little bit. And then this guy I played with from the one show, they came over here with a different band. Remember that? That was like what, 2002? Yeah, no, it was 2001. It was up in Lincolnshire. I'm like, wait, I'm just sitting there like, I can barely remember what day of the week it is, you know? Okay, that's not true. But, you know, I mean, they're very, like there's a lot of real in-depth music lovers that I think maybe because they're not in the East Bay, they're not in London, they aren't in like a center of, a well-known music center, that they pay a lot more attention. And that's super because they're great players and like there's a lot of music and there's a lot of creativity happening here. And so that's really fun.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, a lot of it's all closed down right now because of COVID. So, I mean, there's like a really cool, there's a couple of really cool underground spots here in town, both of which are currently surviving, which is good. And hopefully as soon as they reopen, we'll be able to play both places.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, fingers crossed. I mean, I know that right now they're kind of cautiously predicting that the fall we should see somewhat of a return to quote unquote normal in terms of like, you know, the way that we can gather and everything like that. And I'm cautiously optimistic, but I can't help but be a little pessimistic because, let's face it, like shit is
The US is messed up.
Yeah, everything's stupid. But no, I mean, I'm always interested to know about like the differences between like the different areas of the world and like how they, handle like their music scenes. And because having like I've never been able to tour outside of the United States or to even play any shows outside of the United States, except, well, I did play in Montreal one time with Tsunami Bomb, which, I mean, that was interesting because it was a Pusa Fest, and
Oh yeah.
Montreal is a beautiful city, and the way that they handled that festival was really kind of cool because it's all like, have you played Pusa?
No, but I played Montreal.
Yeah. And, they basically take down like this whole, they take over like this several blocks area of downtown Montreal. And so there's various clubs, kind of like the way that Fest does it,
Okay,
and I think a lot of festivals do it this way nowadays, but it ran like a top. It was awesome,
Cool.
And I keep hearing that sentiment that you mentioned earlier as a revolving theme was, it seems like, especially in like the UK and Europe, and I've heard the same thing about Japan too, is that they tend to really take care of the people who are performing a little bit better in terms of like, here's food, here's a place to stay, like, we're going to at least give you this much money, like, so you at least like have those things to look forward to,
Yeah, it's night and day. I mean, England is not as great as Europe or Japan is with those things, but I mean, it is night and day. Like, I mean, you can still get ripped off. Don't get me wrong, but like,
oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, it is really, really. Plus, you don't have as many expenses for traveling because sometimes you can travel by train. I think they do that in Japan a lot of the bands. But even within Europe, like, you're not going that far. You're not crossing 3,000 miles of a continent,
right,
over a month. Putting 10,000 miles on a van. You're not doing that. Like, you can't.
Right. Tsunami Bomb had been talking about the possibility of trying to do a UK tour, prior to the pandemic issue. And we had a couple of irons in the fire. We were talking about it and we were trying to map it out. And you're totally right. Like, you can literally do an entire like 2-week tour just in the UK. And it's just because, there's these short little distances, and every town has venues, and every town has these. I mean, they're all like usually pretty small from what I understand. They're smaller venues, but they have shows like 7 nights a week, and they just constantly have bands coming through.
Yep.
And I'd love to do that personally. I'm really hoping that we can try to pull that off after everything's kind of back to normal, but maybe we can play a show together.
That'd be great. That'd be awesome. That would be fantastic. I mean, just as an example, like, I mean, talking about being American here in England, because I booked the 3 British shows. I mean, the Bob Fest was already kind of booked for us, so it was kind of like the first 2. So I found a Bristol show that was supposed to be a London show on a Friday, and then we were able to sneak onto all-day festival, an all-dayer they call it, up in Blackpool, and it's like 6 hours drive, and like, everybody here is like, that's crazy, you can't do that. And I'm like, we just get up at 9 a.m. and get in the van, and we get there in plenty of time. And of course we did. It's like, we're American, so like, this is what we do, is wake up early, drag ourselves to the van. Some poor schmuck, one of us, has to drive while the rest are still, and that was just trying to cram in 3 shows in 3 days, without having any kind of network except for people I knew on social media, just kind of like connecting the dots. And so I would imagine, like, with an actual booking agent, and you could actually do like drives of like an hour, and just do go from from Southampton up to Edinburgh and back, and hit the entire country.
Right.
Go over to Northern Ireland. I mean, you are going to deal with Brexit in terms of, right now, the UK government, because they're Boris Johnson, he's a moron. He's smarter than Trump is, but he's still a bumbling idiot. Like, as you may remember, the negotiated and finalized Brexit like Christmas Eve, 2 days before Christmas, and everything expired on the 31st of December. So nobody was prepared, whether, and half the stuff that they were supposed to agree to, they haven't actually gotten to yet. And one of the big things are music and performers and tours, whether it's dance, whether it's theater, whether it's opera, whether it's punk rock, whether it's rock and roll, whether it's reggae, whatever it is, between the UK and the EU, what used to be a really easy, like you just get on the ferry and you go over, can't do that. You have to, there's certain restrictions and this is and that's, and it's either the UK's fault or the EU's fault. And honestly, it's probably the UK's fault for not pushing for it. And now, like, everybody from, like, people like the Scene Killers to like Bono are pissed off, and Elton John are pissed off at the Tories in the UK government, saying, you guys have to fix this, because right now you really. So what I'm saying is, there's going to be a lot of fallout from this Brexit BS for a long time. And like I said, it's not just aimed at Europe. I mean, this was the right wing's attempt to go it alone, and we don't need anybody else, and Britain first, which is very familiar, obviously, to us. I kind of feel like America saw what Britain was doing and said, "Hold my beer," and elected that orange jackass a few years ago. The upshot, though, is that between that go it alone thing and the inherent distrust of the other and the immigrant, even though they're American, because they're mostly whites, they're kind of like us here. It's still a thing, and there's still barriers, and just like British bands trying to get into the U.S., like there's huge barriers to do it legally, and if you do it illegally, that's great as long as you don't get caught.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I heard a little bit about what it was that you were talking about, and I appreciate you taking the moment to kind of explain a little bit more about how that's going to be affecting people in the long term. And it's probably something that musicians should really start digging into now, especially if they're trying to make plans for, like later in this year or the fall, or even leading into next year. Because yeah, it'd be unfortunate to kind of get caught with your pants down, trying to make these big plans, and all of a sudden they crumble at the seams because you didn't understand what was going on. So are there any resources that you might point to as good reference for bands to look at?
I would reach out to people that people know who live over here who are in active bands. That's the best resource.
Yeah.
Or to record labels who have bands over here that go over there, and vice versa. Like, I think that's the best way to do it, because those will always be up to date or more updated, because it's an ongoing thing. Like, maybe when this gets replayed in a couple of months, maybe this will all be fixed.
Yeah. But that's good advice, though, because I mean, yeah, because I think to your point, like the people who run these businesses that are artist centric will probably have the most up to date information, or at least they'll try to.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I mean,
go ahead.
Sorry.
I was going to say, speaking of record labels, you've worked for a handful of them over the years, and those were all in the United States. You don't currently work for a record label out in the UK or anything.
Well, I mean, I am my own record label, Zafia Records with a Z, but that doesn't count.
But so you mentioned that you worked for Alternative Tentacles for a number of years as pretty much like the main operating officer, correct?
So I worked for AT and for Jello for 15 years.
Right.
The last 10 years I was the general manager. So I was the person who was balancing all of the plates while juggling and swallowing fire.
Right. And
you also worked for Jello and his calls at 2 a.m.
I have heard the stories. So
they're all true.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've had the pleasure of meeting Jello a couple of times. I like him, a lot from what I've gotten to know of him, and I'm hoping to be able to hang out with him a little bit more, considering that the band that I'm in is on his label.
You're on his label, yeah.
Yeah.
He's a great guy. Like
Yeah.
he really is genuinely a good person and a nice guy. He's unique.
Mhm.
I'm sure your bassist Dominic has told you chapter and verse about how unique he can be. but like he also loves music and loves art and creativity and politics, and he is notorious for talking people's ears off. But he also has a lot to say, and he has a lot of thought behind what he says. But I mean, if you get him started on, like, I mean, I mentioned him being super stoked that Dick Lucas was going to be on his label. You know, that's a music lover. That's a music lover's reaction. It's not like, oh, well, great, we'll be able to, you know, really capture that crusty punk demographic. No, it's like Dick Lucas, no way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, Dom has certainly echoed that sentiment about Jello to me as well in conversation, where he is very passionate about music, and like his label, I mean, because Alternative Tentacles is essentially his label. I think that it was started technically by him and someone else in the Dead Kennedys, right? But then they kind of split paths. But yeah, Dom has echoed that sentiment that it really is a reflection of his taste, you know, and he purposefully tries to keep it eclectic and tries to keep it, you know, outside of the margins, you know, so to speak, because he doesn't want it to be cookie cutter. He doesn't want it to necessarily fall into like these little like kind of pigeonholed, you know, groups of like what is punk rock or what is this or that. Like he just wants it to be in the like, I love this band and I want it to be on my label, you know. And I mean, shoot, over the years he's worked with so many awesome bands. I mean, shoot, the Melvins, you know, fucking Wesley Willis, you know, I mean, recently he's been working with Dead Ending and the Darts, and like, you know, it's I certainly can appreciate that because, you know, the label that I run, Sell the Heart, I've mentioned this many times on this podcast. I try to keep this label as a more of a reflection of my musical taste as well. I don't hit every mark with it. Like I mean, I love jazz, you know, but I don't think I'd be able to market a jazz record, you know. So, but yeah, no, that I'd imagine that you have plenty of stories to tell. I mean, are there any like stories that you could maybe come up with like briefly that are kind of noteworthy about your time at AT?
Sure. There's a bunch. I mean, Jello has historically been a Luddite. When I got there when I started working there in 2002, he had a fax machine. And so we would fax some things. He also lived, this was when it was in San Francisco before it moved to where it is now in Emeryville. So he lived pretty nearby. We were in Noe Valley. And so he would come down and pick up his mail because all of his mail goes through the P.O. box that is run by the label. So the label picks up his mail and then he gets it somehow. Anyway, so he would always work by fax. And this is literally in the 21st century. But whatever, you know, an end phone, not computer literate at all, not computer compatible. Then in, I think, 2011, okay, so at the time, what we would do is we would get emails addressed to Jello because he had an email address through the label. So people would email him there, and then we would read it and print it out and fax it to him. And if it was urgent, he would handwrite a response and fax it back to the office.
Okay.
And then we would type it in and send it off. If it wasn't urgent, he would, when we picked up the mail, he would give us a stack of emails with handwritten notes about what to say to respond.
Okay.
And this went on for years. So in 2011, his band Jello BF and the Guantanamo School of Medicine, I think they were kind of over that. Like he had a cell phone by that point, didn't text, but they got him like not an iPhone or an iPod. It wasn't an iPod Nano. It was one of those weird interim things, like a little Apple thing.
Sure.
It could take calls and could text, and I think it could email.
Okay.
I don't remember which brand name it was. Anyway, it was one of those little Apple things. And he wrote me an email that I printed out, out of, tradition,
Yeah.
and put it on the wall of the office. And it says, so I have a photo of it somewhere. It basically says, "This is my first email ever. Don't get used to this. The end is here."
That's great.
And then he eventually we got him an iPhone. And so this was like his family, his band, his record label, all kind of working together to get him at least into the 21st century, at least get him an iPhone. We showed him how to text. We got him a MacBook of some sort through a contact at Apple, and showed him that. And he still, like, when he's working on his computer, when he does open it, he's always like, "God damn it." And like, you have to call him and he asks you to figure out how to change a password, or this, like, "What's this pop-up? What does that mean?" Whatever. I mean, he's very, very knowledgeable about a lot of things, but he has very little patience for technology. That's what it is. It's not like he's not an idiot at all, but he just doesn't have the patience, or he doesn't have the interest in learning this kind of stuff. But he took to texting and email like a fish to water. Like now it's just like, he just goes on and on and on. It's like a phone call, except it's by text. Right. And for the rest of us, it's great because he has a very specific, he gets up around 2 p.m. Pacific time, goes to sleep around 5 or 6 in the morning. So that's great if you're Jello and you're going out to see shows every night or every other night, which he does, or he did, at least before lockdown. But for those who are working, regular business hours, putting out records for him, it's not so great to get a 2 a.m. phone call. So, the fact that he can now email and text means there's a lot less noise happening.
Right.
at weird hours. But I mean, honestly, like, I'm really surprised. Like, he really pushed forward in his own development in terms of like embracing email and embracing text. And honestly, like, he's even embraced digital formats. So like when MP3s and waves and everything came out originally, Napster and the iTunes and everything, he was like, "That's not a format. That's not a viable format. That's not an actual format. It's, it's physical, it's vinyl, compact disc, audio cassette, DVD, video cassette, whatever, and I remember having this conversation with him over the decade that I was the GM there. And by the end of it, he understood that digital was a format, is a legitimate format. And we've done digital only releases on Alternative Tentacles. And, they've been fine. And a lot of so it's been a learning experience kind of, well, for everybody, for all of society, really. But it's been very interesting working with him as somebody who is A, well-known, and B, a well-known Luddite, to see how he's changed over the years, I mean, millennial or somebody who's grown up, tied to a screen, like, I don't like their development and their use patterns isn't very interesting because it's really obvious. But to have someone who is north of 60, but who has been creative and young acting the entire time, yet still stubborn and unwilling to take any BS, it was very interesting to watch that transition.
Yeah, no doubt. That's a great story. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm sure that framed email is. I'm sorry.
Cut it.
Yeah. But so besides Alternative Tentacles, though, you mentioned that you worked as a production manager at Fat Records for a number of years, and you also worked at Lookout for a long time, right?
So, okay, I worked at Lookout for 2.5 years, something like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, worked in mail order and in the store, and
their physical store that they had for a little while.
Yeah, on University Avenue in Berkeley. Worked there, and then for a while there, I was something called the royalty advocate. Because, I mean, Lookout, without getting too far into it, as most of you know, Lookout went under because they got way too far behind on royalties, and even the people who were owed the most, who had given them the most leeway, finally had it. And they were like, you need to pay us or we're taking our records. And so Green Day and Operation Ivy left. And that was the end of the label. Short version. Their royalty situation there was very complex. And so I was in a couple of bands that were on Lookout at the time while I was working there, Blatz and the Criminals. And even working there, I kind of understood the royalty system, but not really. And I knew for a fact that my bandmates, current and former, had no idea how to read what we were being sent. Like there was just, it's just, you know, it wasn't really written for a lay person, which band members generally are when it comes to royalty. So I basically met with Chriser and everybody and kind of came up with this job title and this job of royalty advocate. And that lasted until I quit. So,
yeah.
And then I was at Fat Records for about 14 months.
Oh, okay.
So a little over a year. And that was awesome. Helped put out a crap ton of records, reissues as well as new records. Somehow I got my paws on, we ended up doing 3 different Swing and Utters records that year. I came in on the tail end of the Sun, the Drowning Sea, the double LP Gatefold, Drowning in the Sea. Anyway, great. It's a great compilation of Swing and Utters records. And then like we did Peace and Love, the full length. And there was one more I was involved in. I know I was just realizing like a few months ago, I was like, wow, let me look it up while we're talking because this is kind of bugging me now. Anyway, so I did a lot there and that was super fun. Swing in Utters. There we go. That's how you spell it. And that was good. And, you know, right now I work with Fat Records through Packaged Sounds. So I brought over Alternative Tentacles, Fat Records. Obviously, I don't bring over anything from Lookout because they don't exist anymore.
Right.
So, I was involved with Peace and Love, and then Drowning in the Sea, Rising with the Sun. That was right when I got there. And then, there was a 7-inch. I think that's what it was. Okay. Anyway, Undertake, Sirens, that was the 7-inch. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, so as a production manager, your main job was essentially to make sure that the manufacturing of the physical product went through seamlessly and kind of happened on a timely manner, like to meet the goal, right?
And digital too.
Oh, and digital. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, is there anything that you would say was markedly different between the labels, like in terms of, I don't know, like, I mean, obviously they are 3 different entities, and I think people understand like some of the nuance between them, you know, because I mean the personalities involved. We have Jello Biafra, we have Fat Mike, and we have, you know, Larry Livermore and Chris Applegren and those guys. But I mean, as somebody who was kind of there, you know, like I don't know, what would you say is like the main differences between the 3? Like,
I would just add Molly Newman to the Lookout side.
Oh, right, Molly Newman, yes, yeah.
Who's definitely a big part of that label,
right?
Kind of a force of nature behind Chriser, frankly.
Yeah, because correct me if I'm wrong, but when Larry, I'm sorry,
when he cashed out.
Well, yeah, when he cashed out, it basically transferred to Chris and then Molly, and then wasn't there also a third person involved?
It turned over to four managers.
Okay.
Chris Applegren, Molly Newman, Kathy Bauer,
and yeah,
my ex Jane Tages.
Got it. So, right. Okay.
So that ended up consolidating into Chriser, Molly, and Kathy.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I had Chris on the show actually
Okay.
a few weeks back, and we talked about it a little bit. We didn't go too far deep into the particulars, but that was something that I had seen in like my research on Chris prior to having the conversation. So I appreciate you
Yeah.
reminding us of that. So thank you. But
Anyway, so I would say that they're all three of them are very much family labels.
mhm.
Like they're run by individuals. No matter what you can say or want to say about any of them, like they weren't. How do I say this? There are definitely times when people at various labels, various of the three labels, made decisions based on what would sell and what wouldn't sell.
Mhm.
But there's never been anything where it's just been, okay, this is garbage, but we really, really think this will sell, so we're going to do it, even though it doesn't make any sense whatsoever compared to everything else that we've put out. That said, obviously, Lookout made a very strong turn into kind of like what we used to call college radio, indie rock.
Right.
Turned away from the classic Lookout sound in their later years, and so that obviously had an effect on the label.
Mhm.
Being very polite there, but I would say actually all three really were driven and are driven by a love of music and a love of creativity and a love of putting out music that they've just dig. Like I've seen tussles at at all three labels. I'm being very circumspect right now because I'm just trying to be polite.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Where people, different people at the labels had like they loved and or hated particular bands or particular releases from bands, even if they were bands that they'd already put out, and that would be a conflict that you'd have to fix. And that was true for all three labels. Like you'd have to come to an agreement like, okay, if person X and person Y love and hate this band and they're two of the people who make this decision, the final decision about who gets signed, how do you resolve that? And that it wasn't always pretty. I would say Fat was always by far the most financially organized and had by far the most financial resources. Lookout had a lot more financial resources at a certain point, but they didn't have the financial knowledge or expertise to make good decisions when they had that, when they were at that apex of financial stability.
Right.
They were never stable, but they had a lot of money coming in.
Right.
But Fat, on the other hand, has always been like very clear, very, very clear about keeping good accounting and really trying to stay on top of things. So it was kind of like night and day, those two labels, because both had huge successes. And honestly, like Fat Records, like they're still having a lot of large successes. And, people, kind of people on the street and people on social media like talk all kinds of trash, especially about Fat Mike and especially about NoFX, but they are beloved. They sell so much music, like it's insane. And that's just reality. Like, nattering the bobs of negativism on the internet can, be all bummed out and talk trash all they want, but that's the truth. It's like there's a lot of people out there who love a lot of these bands, and it doesn't really matter to them what Joe Blow from Maximum Rock and Roll thinks about it.
Right.
And anyway, that's a side note. But the I would say Fat has its financial house in order, and they make decisions about bands with like solid data. Like how much should we press of this, or how much is it worth it to repress this? And they have all the sales and the what distributors bought what, and they can, and how did it do digitally, and they can look at all that information and say, okay, well, we should do this and we should do that. And then, okay, the band's going on tour, okay, well, should we do a tour edition? If not, is it worth it? Will they sell it? Like they have a lot of that really down pat, where at other places it's often just been guesswork and wishful thinking. And that often, and that combined with like, ups and downs in physical formats has meant a lot of furniture made out of compact discs.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that that's totally worth noting is that, there's, I think oftentimes, especially like when we're a little younger, there's this like romanticizing of like this, scene mentality that trickles into the business side of things. When in reality, it's a business and you kind of have to treat it as a business, or else it will start to fall apart if you're shooting from the hip at literally every turn. Because, you know, like you've said, like there could be a really great band that sold a really great, record that was really well received and it sold a bunch. And then they turn around, and I'm not trying to say that I'm speaking of any band in particular, but then they release a record that is not, and then it doesn't sell. And then all of a sudden, you've invested all this money into it thinking like, oh, it's going to just be a repeat of the last one. And it isn't at all. And that actually happens a lot, and what are you to do at that point? So I think having the data and relying on the data and being wise in that respect is only going to benefit you. And I mean, that's good to know that, like a place like Fat, seems to have traditionally had that in their back pocket, versus like other labels that maybe haven't been as good at doing that,
Two things. One, to be 100% clear, Fat would still keep that band, all right, but they would just downgrade their expectations and press less, basically, of the next record. And they would, I mean, and all of, okay, I know for AT and for Fat, the primary owners are very involved with the music. Fat Mike is historically often actually recording the bands or sitting in as producer for a lot of the records. Jello has a lot of opinions about music and is very forceful about giving them, especially to bands that he's putting out. He's rejected, I mean, all of these people have rejected what I think are great records by bands or bands that I think they should have signed. And any record label employee of this level of label will have their list of bands that they told, their bosses to sign, and they didn't.
Right.
On the other hand, there is an opportunity for people like me to have influence. Like, like these people are not bean counters who make the decisions. They're Fat Mike, they're Jello, they're Chris. They're open to, they want to know more things. They want to know more bands and who's up and coming and who's looking for a new label and whatever. So, I mean, we've all had successes in getting bands signed, not in getting them signed, but putting them in front of the people who make the decision to sign them.
Right.
So I just wanted to say that, like, so people like Fat will keep a band, but they won't necessarily, they'll be more aware of what they're pressing. The second thing is, I forget what it was.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I've heard of the fact that Nirvana actually sent early demos to AT back in the day. Like,
I believe it.
Yeah. And like, from what I understand, like somewhere in the archives is a lowly Nirvana demo tape that is I apparently needs to be found, because it's, I mean, I don't think that Jello's the type that would turn around and try to sell it or anything. I'm sure he'd keep it and just have
he has
it.
Like no, he has it.
Oh, somewhere. He has it. Okay. Yeah. I'd be very interested to hear that at some point if I could, but
no, I mean, his record collection and his music collection is insane, and he does keep everything because he's crazy. Like, he listens to all of the demos that come in, at least a few seconds of each one. Like, I won't lie and say that he listens to, but he gets people. I mean, all labels do this. All labels get this. They get a crap ton of demos or recordings or of whatever format they're sent that are completely inappropriate. Like, like Christian pop chanteuses send demo tapes to Jello Biafra. you don't know where you're sending it. That is literally a waste of postage and of raw materials. Like,
Right.
but he'll listen to probably a few seconds of it,
Right.
and then he'll put it in the tray and pack it up and put it to one side somewhere in his house.
Yeah.
You know.
Wow. Well, no, I appreciate you kind of sharing these anecdotes. I think that's some interesting stuff right there. I wanted to ask you about your time at Package Sound. So now you work there, and you actually do handle the order kind of setup and the overall start to end point of a manufacturing of, like, say, a vinyl record. Or do you guys do CDs there too? Right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you guys kind of handle all that stuff. And, you know, I don't know, for people out there that are interested in getting vinyl records manufactured, like, what would you say is like the main, like, advice that you would give them, like, before they contacted you? Like what should they know before going into, like, trying to manufacture a record, just to make sure that it goes smoothly,
They should know that it takes a long time.
Yeah.
I'm not just covering my own ass with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's CDs are extremely quick. They can be done probably as quick as 2 or 3 weeks. If you get a good place like Package Sound, or wherever. But vinyl is not quick because of the way of the steps that are needed in its manufacturing. And one of the steps is called a test pressing. That's where you have, once you make, basically vinyl, it's obviously, maybe not obviously, CD is kind of half digital, but vinyl is all physical, with a couple of exceptions, small exceptions, but basically it's almost all physical, which means that you have mothers and fathers and stampers and things that stamp into vinyl, into hot wax, like in a reverse. So it's like a mold, and it's like and there's like thousands of pounds of pressure and all this different stuff going on, like high temperatures, very industrial process, galvanizing, toxic chemicals, so the whole 9 yards. Anyway, so it's a physical process, and part of that physical process is you get something called a test pressing, which is basically a record from the stampers that will be used for the regular, the full run, and then we press one small run of 5 or 4 LPs or 7 inches or whatever size vinyl, and send it to the customer, and they listen to it. And if it sounds good, if it sounds like what they are expecting, they approve it. And if not, we go from there. We figure out what went wrong. If there's a problem with the original masters that we got, which often is the case, or if we have to redo the tests, whatever, but basically that takes time. And it's a really important part of it, because I always tell people you should do the test pressing, and you should expect for it to take time and to give yourself time. Don't expect to be a quick turnaround. I mean, we're really quick compared to the overall industry, but at the same time, we're not rushing it. We can't rush it, because it's literally like physically like a machine going, and you take it out, put something else, a little pellet of a little cake of vinyl, and then it goes, and then you take out the vinyl, the finished record, and then you put another pellet. And it's like, literally, it's physical. Like, you can't rush that. It's not like, putting a record up on Bandcamp. You just wait for something to upload to the cloud. Done. Right. So, I always tell people, look, you're making a physical relic. You want to make sure that it's the right thing, and that you're not wincing every time you hear it or every time you look at it. Make sure that the art is right. Make sure that the material that you want it to be on is right. Make sure that, you have the proper printing, you have the proper packaging, you have the proper sound, and so I would say one other thing that people should keep in mind is when you're in the studio with the person who's mixing the record and doing a final master, make sure they do a master that's appropriate for vinyl, if you're going to press vinyl, and for digital, because they're 2 different formats, and they have very different sonic qualities that are that each format emphasizes. Digital emphasizes everything, the entire spectrum, because it's literally just ones and zeros. It's very binary. Like you can hear everything. Vinyl, on the most part, has more bass and less treble.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's a real basic way of putting it. But basically, so you need to have two different final mixes that play up the sonic qualities that each format excels at.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, at this point, what would you say is the average turnaround for like once everything's submitted to when it will usually be in the person's hands?
Sure. Well, right now, so Package Sounds, as you know, we have a plant in Poland and we have a plant in the UK. Mm-hmm. So there's always a little bit of like, well, it really depends if, kind of thing. And, how many you're pressing of what and what the packaging is and how many variants and whatever. Anyway, so with that disclaimer in front, it can be, I would say, right now we're running at like 3 to 4 weeks for a test pressing from when we first get the sound source, whether it's a WAV file or it's a physical lacquer or stampers, just because we're just backed up. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are doing vinyl right now. That's great. And then assuming, so that's say 3 to 4 weeks, and then assuming that there's a instant turnaround on the test pressing, like, a couple of days, which is totally possible. Then it's, again, this is where it gets a little fudgy, 6 to 8 weeks, 8 weeks at the outside. So like at the most, you're looking at 12 weeks from beginning to end if you go conservatively, which is pretty damn good. That's the worst though. Like that's really the worst time. Like we are always trying to back that down to something closer to like 8 weeks or 10 weeks. And because those are insane times, and we had those actually at the beginning of lockdown, but then I think everybody stopped touring and started recording and putting out records. No, seriously, like everybody got slammed. And then what happened was actually with COVID, we had one major plant in the EU got hit with a series of outbreaks. Oh. So they shut down full pressing lines. And so all of a sudden, this huge plant in the EU, all of their business had to go elsewhere.
Right.
And then also separately, a major label also bought out another pressing plant's capacity in the run up to the holidays. So all of a sudden that was another plant that was basically off limits to everybody else. So then all of us remaining plants in the EU and the UK have just been deluged with business. So like, it's great. And we've been adding, we've added 2 presses to our Polish plant. We might be doing a third, I'm not really sure. We're putting in another 2 or 3 presses in our UK plant. So, we're expanding.
Yeah.
So I just really, basically all this is saying that the turnaround time might be different in a month or 2. We're really hoping that it is. But it is a physical process. Like there's no way around these times. Like you have to do it. And, if you want to go to somebody who has, like who does like the lacquers, like the under 50 pressing, you can do that.
Right.
It's going to sound, it'll be okay.
Yeah.
But
yeah, the lathe cut vinyl in my experience has not really been that great in my I'm not saying that there isn't lathe cut vinyl that is perfectly fine. Right. I personally have not felt like that stoked on what I've heard, you know. So, but I'm sure that it's getting better as it goes down the road, but
if I could, 16 kilohertz in Oakland
Yes.
You know, that's an exception.
Yes, I
They
agree.
do
Yeah,
really good work.
they do. Yeah. And like, I actually had an opportunity to go into their facility.
Workspace.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
basically like a converted like home, I think.
yeah,
But
I've been there. Yeah,
yeah, and great guys. I mean, I'd like to work with them at some point. But their process is really neat because like they use like it's like basically like a PVC type of material that, is just kind of like, stamped together, and then they have like the mold, like the stamper, and then it, heats up, and then much like a regular vinyl record, just imprints it. And then what I like about what they do too is that everything's like a picture disc, so you
yeah,
can really make each record unique, if you really want to. And yeah, I actually have a couple of records that they've done, and they do sound very good. So
yeah.
like
They do.
kudos to them. Yeah, but that's not a lathe cut though. That's
No,
a different process.
yeah,
So
yeah. They have like a old 7-inch press, if I remember right.
right. Yeah. Yeah. They showed me the whole process. It was really interesting actually. Yeah. But
Yeah. So just for your listeners, 16 kilohertz. It's run by two people, and they put out 7 inches that are they're picture discs, but they're not traditional picture discs that in the U.S. are mostly done over at Erica in Los Angeles. Their picture disc traditionally is a piece of paper printed on both sides, crushed between two pieces of plastic.
mm-hmm.
And because it has paper in the middle, and because it's plastic, some sort of, it might be, I don't think it's actually vinyl, but I'm not really, don't quote me on that. But basically, the grooves are shallower than a traditional piece of vinyl. So the sound for a picture disc is generally much, much worse than any piece of vinyl that you're going to get otherwise. However, these guys at 16 kilohertz, they don't have a piece of paper that's crushed between two in a sandwich. They don't have shallow grooves. They have deeper grooves, and so that means that the sound is much, much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I have the long shot 7-inch that they did, and yeah, it sounds great as far as I'm concerned. So that's great. Well, hey, I appreciate all that information, and I'm glad that things at Package Sound are going great. I mean, I've certainly had nothing but a great experience working with you, so I will continue to be working with you, at least, for the relative future. But so the last couple of questions that I have for you, first one is, who are some artists that you'd like to kind of give a shout out to that you think people should know about? Like artists that you think maybe aren't getting enough attention.
Okay. Thankfully, you gave me a heads up that you were going to ask this question, so I was able to. So I came up with a few. These are all bands that have recent records. I figured that was an easy way to do it, because if you're looking through the past, however many decades of punk rock and loud rock and I don't know, all kinds of music that I like, that could be a very long question. So current bands from here, Bob Vylan with a V, spelled like Dylan, but with a V. They're from London. They put out their first record called We Live Here, and it's absolutely unique and awesome. And yeah, I can't, We Live Here might be my favorite song from 2020. There's a band out of Melbourne called Private Function that Austin from Hip Priests and Scene Killers hit me to. They have a record out called Whose Line Is It Anyway? Came out last year, 2020 as well. Private Function. I mean, it's a weird name because it's like kind of like a really bland. And if you Google Private Function, you get like, event halls. Dumbass name. I don't know. Anyway, but regardless, they're the exception to having a boring name. They're just great. Bobby Funk is another one from here in England. They have a new record out called Longing for the Bonging. And that has a great song called I'm a Cat, about being a cat.
Awesome.
Yeah. But the whole record is really fun, raucous punk rock. All these are punk rock records. There's a band out of Oslo called The Good, the Bad, and the Zugly. That's Zugly with a Z.
Okay.
And they put out a record called Algorithm and Blues in late 2019, which is just awesome stuff. I mean, it's so good. Again, not a great band name, but that's okay. I mean, I was a man called the Criminal, so I can't really speak.
Oh yeah.
uh, AC/DC is all gay AC/DC cover band. Unsurprisingly, considering the name, AC/DC, and it features Chris Freeman from Payne's Division on lead vocals. Awesome stuff. They don't have any records out. I think they're concerned about being sued.
Right.
So I don't know if they'll ever put out any records.
Yeah.
But also Warren Women out of Baltimore, they put out a new record this year called Wonderful Hell, but I really like the one from 2018 called Capture the Flag. The new one is really good, but I think Capture the Flag is awesome from Warren Women. And honestly, like I play a lot of new bands on my show on MMH Radio. If I could give a plug real quick.
Sure.
It's so I was on KALX in Berkeley, college radio station for 27, 28 years until moving away. And so when I came over to England, I was able to land a gig here at MMH Radio, which originally stood for Midlands Metalheads Radio. And they changed it to MMH because they have like everything from blues to indie to punk rock to death rock to goth to metal, but all kinds of metal, whether it's death metal or gore metal to new wave of British heavy metal to just all kinds of stuff, good and bad. I mean, it's kind of like KLX in that it's all over the map, depending on who's on the air.
Nice.
Anyway, it's a show called Losing It with Luscious, and it's every Monday evening here, 8 p.m. GMT, which translates to 12 noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. And it's a lot of fun. It's 2 hours. It's a lot of old stuff, a lot of new stuff, a lot of Cher stuff before she sold out. It's a lot of crap, but that's what you like, you know?
Love it. Yeah. No, I'm stoked that you're still able to do your radio show. Yeah. Cause I know that you've managed to play a couple of the songs from like Middle-Aged Queers on your show, which is highly appreciated.
They made it onto my best of 2020 show last week.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super rad. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
But
I mean, honestly, I figure you're gonna plug Middle-Aged Queer, so I don't have to even name them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love that record so much. Like, Sean and those guys have just they as far as I'm concerned, they blew it out of the park. Like they did a great job with that record. It's just so fun and lighthearted. Kind of reminds me of the stuff that was coming out of the East Bay back in the 90s, just fun and lighthearted and but really good too.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Were there any other bands that you wanted to shout out real quick, or was that it?
That's it. I mean, I could, like I said, I could go on for hours, and that's not great.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to see if you had completed your thought or not. But
yeah.
But thank you for that list. And then the last question I have for you, and I throw this out to every guest. I'm always very interested to hear what you have to say. Is if you were stuck with 5 records for the rest of your life, what would they be?
Yeah, I have a big long list here, and I only cheated once, and that was with DOA, Bloodied But Unbowed, because that's a compilation record of songs from their first 3 records, came out in 1983, I think. It's called The Damage to Date, 1978 to 1983. But anyway, DOA were one of the first punk rock bands I loved, and that was the first DOA record I got, actually, was Bloodied But Unbowed. And it's a compilation record. It's kind of like loving the Ramones, Ramones Mania. It's kind of cheating,
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it's so that's why this question is very difficult, because if you don't cheat, so I chose DOA, Bloodied But Unbowed, The Runaways, their debut, The Runaways, because I wanted my Joan Jett fix, but then I couldn't figure out which Joan Jett record to pick. It was The Runaways, okay, that's the best one, and all the way through. AC/DC, again, same thing, they're one of my favorite bands ever, and so I just chose the US version of Dirty Deeds, Done Dirt Cheap.
Okay.
It could have been any number of 12 or 13 records by them, seriously, but the US version of Dirty Deeds, because as people know, that there's different versions from Australia versus when they were reissued in the US, after they became a larger band. They kind of switched around some songs. Anyway, X, Los Angeles. Again, a band that I could probably pick a couple different records, but I went with the classic debut, Los Angeles, and finally The Clash, the Green record.
Okay.
The first record.
Nice.
But I don't know whether I would choose the US or the UK version.
Okay.
I'll leave that up to the shipwreck.
Okay. Whichever island you're on, right?
Yeah, whichever whichever version the ship has that I'm able to grab before I get into the lifeboat.
Got it. Yeah. Well, hey, that's a great list. I appreciate I appreciate the diversity that you have there. I mean, I love that you have, some bands from, well, they're all like pretty earlier, in your lifespan. So yeah, I mean, yeah. I can appreciate that, because I know that
I'm my age.
It's hard. Well, it's hard. I think it would be hard to pick something that's a little bit more current, unless it was just something that completely blew your mind, because, our tastes are so developed when we're younger, and I think that kind of sets the tone for the rest of your life, So, yeah, I mean, I think about it often too, because I've said this before, the two bands that I know would come on my list for sure would be Smashing Pumpkins and Fugazi, but it'd be hard to pick which album if right. Because I freaking celebrate their entire catalogs, but I try to keep plugged into new music, and every once in a while something comes up that I'm just like, dude, like this is the shit, like this is the album. But would I pick one of those as like my forever album? Like it's right. I think that's a tough call. But
well, look, I could have put something like The Briefs, hit after hit from 2001. I could have put Le Plebe, Brasso and Brasso from 2011. I mean, there's a bunch of others that, yeah. I mean, but again, there's only 5, and I could have put The Filth Side of the Shit Split. That is like imprinted in my brain. So much of this music is, it's and Pansy Division, Absurd Pop Song Romance. That's pretty much a great record from start to finish. And right. Or maybe I could pick a different Pansy Division. Anyway, so I had to go back basically.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, Jesse, it's been really great to talk to you and catching up a little bit. And, I'm glad that you're doing well, and that things at Package Sound are going great, and that vinyl is, through the roof.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm glad that, hopefully before too long, we'll be able to get back to what we're normally doing, and we can kind of gather in groups again. And hopefully we can play a show sometime in the UK with Tsunami Bomb and the Scene Killers, or the Pathogens, or maybe both. But yeah, anyone who's interested in manufacturing some vinyl, hit this man up and get it going, because he will hook you up. I can speak from my own experience. Definitely check out all of his bands. You have the Pathogens, you have Scene Killers, and check out his former groups. We didn't mention the Frisk either. That's right. Yeah. You were in the Frisk, and the Criminals, and the Groups, and Blatz, and all that good stuff. So take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you real soon.
Great. And hey, thanks for putting out records with us. And it's been a joy. Thank you.
Yeah. My pleasure. I'm stoked that it's been working out. Take care.
See you.